What's up, Magical Misfits? Drew here, and this is a viewer request. So a while back I showed my grimoire, and I've had a couple questions about it. Of course, I'm doing mine sort of digitally. I'm putting it in my computer and printing it out, and that presents its own problems, if you will. So if I had bought a prefab, beautifully bound book and decided to use that as my grimoire, it would have been very different. I could have just opened the book and either freehand or collaged or whatever it was I was going to do, which I love all of those ideas and I love doing that kind of thing. It's really beautiful. But I could have just, started on one sheet, turned it, and did the next. But since I'm doing it the way I'm doing it, I have to set margins, and I want to print both front and back. The margins have to be in the right place, and there's just all these sort of little logistical things that I have to do to make it come out the way I really want it to. And it took me a minute to kind of troubleshoot that and figure that out. And I've had some questions about that. So I am going to quickly, for anyone who's interested, run through my process and how I do this, and maybe that will be of benefit to someone. So here we go. So forgive the angle and the messy desk. I'm going to do my best to try to do all of this in a way that you can see it. So first things first, I start with this. I have a folder, and it has all kinds of stuff in it. This is stuff for my husband's, that I'm going to be putting in my husband's grimoire. I'm also going to be creating his for him. Originally, we had 3-ring binders that we kept all our information in, and I didn't consider them grimoires per se, and so we would put the information in these little sleeves that we could put inside. And so this is a bunch of his information because his stuff is actually very different than mine. Some stuff is exactly the same and other stuff is wildly different. Although it's funny because we can look at each other's from time to time, because I may find myself wanting information that he has that I don't once in a great while, and vice versa. Whereas the stuff that we want readily available for our own reference is somewhat different. And then for me, I have this sheet of paper. And the reason I have this is because I have to start off really looking at what it is that I want to do, exactly how I want to do it. I have to map out the book as I go. Otherwise, because I'm printing front and back, I won't know how it goes together. So here we go. Originally, so I knew I wanted title pages. So I have a very first title page. It is one page, and so it's on the front. And then I have a blessing page. It's one page, so it's on the back. And so on and so forth. Like here we get to the glossary where I have, it's basically just some definitions, which honestly, for the most part, I know the definition too. But if I want to tell someone else, for instance, my son will ask me questions sometimes, or friends, and I can give a precise definition to what it is, an answer that's more concise than what I would come up with off the top of my brain, I prefer to do so. So I have a little glossary in the front, and that one, you can see, is 6 pages long. Sorry, the camera's shaky, I'm holding it. And so I went from front, back, front, so then it starts on the back, and then the second page is on the front, third is back, front, all the way. This way, I don't get confused when I go to print. I keep track of every single detail so that it all comes out right in the end. And I do this as I go. So I will be working in my computer making a page, and so I'll, like with the glossary, I sat there and I made that, and I saw that it took 6 pages to make that. So I went ahead and jotted that down. And then the next thing was my sigil wheel, which took 1 page. So I jotted that down. I will also say this, because I'm printing front and back, I made the mistake initially of just, like for instance with the glossary, just doing one full document. That doesn't work. You can't set the margins back and forth that way. So I had to go back and create extra documents. I had to copy and paste into new documents for each page. So now I'll make a page and I'll save it as, for instance, when I did my elements, I did Earth 1. It was one page. Set the margins. Where is it at? Hold on. Okay, so I did this and set the margins, saved it as Earth 1. And then I did the back, saved the margins, and did it as Earth 2. Same with Air 1, Air 2, to have two separate documents so that I could set the margins accordingly. So that's how I do it now. I go ahead and I do one page at a time, and if I see that what I'm working on is going to take more than one pages, I just create new documents, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So I'm quickly gonna just do a sort of mock-up page to show you my process with actually making the pages, and then I already have my next section ready for printing, so I'll go ahead and print that out and show you my process as far as printing and putting it in my book goes. Please ignore the little line in my screen. It's damaged, I guess. I don't know, it just showed up one day. We just ignore it, so. But under this little line is Word. So I'm going into Word, and I'm going to pick a blank document because I'm doing the mock-up. So let's pretend that this was going to be a front page, meaning, obviously, front. And then when I refer to back, I mean the back of the same sheet. Okay, I'm holding the camera. I'm going to try to hold it as still as possible. So if I were doing a front page, I would come in and go to layout and pick margins. And the first thing that I do is set the margins to narrow so that I can print as far to the edge of the page as possible. And then I customize. And if it's a front, I know that the side of the page that's going to be in the binding is going to be to the left. So I go to the left margin, and I know that I need to make my margin 1.6, and so I do. And I just do the opposite if it's a back page. I go in, I put the margins to narrow first, then I customize, and instead of making the margin from the left, I make it from the right because it will be the opposite side, if that makes sense. I'll show you what I mean. So, for example, you can see this is the front side of the sheet. I've already put holes in this one because it's been in my book. But you can see that there is a margin here on the right. This is the back, so the margin is over here on the left. This is why I have to keep meticulous track of what page goes where. So I know what's on the front, where the so I know how to place the margin, and the same for the back. I know how to place the margin. And of course, the next step would be just to type my content. Personally, I use Google Image. I'm not going to be selling this at all. It's just for my own personal use. So I just copy and paste the images. I like to make sure that all of the images are behind the text. So what I mean is, okay, so I've gone into Google Images and just grabbed quickly a pentacle for show. And I would size this accordingly. Of course, you just click on it and you use these little margins to move the mouse and change the size. I don't need to do that right now. So you do need to click on it to change its formatting though. And this would also be under layout. I'm already in layout, so I'm going to come to position. First thing I like to do is place it in a position because then you can move it freely around the page. For whatever reason, when you bring an image in and you just stick it on, you can't move it freely unless you position it first. I don't know why. So then I go to wrap text and I make sure it's behind the text. I do this because if I don't, you see the little white block. This is all counted as the image. So when I go to type, I'm not going to get close to this image if that's what I want. So as you can see, I've typed some gobbledygook, like I'm trying to type text beside it. And this is just where the margin goes automatically when I've just plopped this image on the page. So I come up and I put it behind the text, and now I can put the text wherever I want. It doesn't have to be outside of that little box. And I like to put text right up against the image. Just a personal preference, especially when it comes to my grimoire. Okay, so I showed you how I set my margins and told you why. Now I'll show you how I personally came up with my margins. Now you can see my page is a little bit different. This is the original. It's just regular paper, parchment paper, ordered off the internet, printer paper, regular size. But because I made my grimoire, the book itself, from scratch, I kind of have to play with it. The pages are a little too big. They stick out further than I want them to, so I do trim them a bit. But I figured out by looking at the margins of my book, which I have these little flaps in my book, and how the page is going to sit. How long is this little flap? How big do I need my margin to be? Now this little flap is just under 1.5 inches. And I wanted to make it just a bit bigger. So if I put these two pieces of paper together so that it's like the original size, and I hold my ruler up, I looked and I decided I wanted my margin set at, I made it 1.6 just to be on the safe side rather than 1.5 inches. Just to give myself that little bit extra wiggle room in the margin when it came to being bound in the book. So essentially I just used my ruler to figure out how big I needed my margin to be. And again, that's going to depend on the size of your grimoire and what you're putting in and its margins, and how much of the page will be covered when you bind it, when you stick it in. If you're doing it in a 3-ring binder, for instance, the margin, there really isn't a need for a margin other than to have a place to put punch holes. Unless you're going to put them in those clear plastic sheets, then you don't need a margin at all. So it all just depends on your particular book. It's all custom work. So here we are. This is my first page of tarot. I have it written on my sheet that the first page is a front page. I've already set the margins and saved it. Now I just need to print. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to print off all of my tarot section for my book, at least that I have made right now. It's mainly just spreads. Some of the spreads I got from YouTubers and from other sources, and when it's a YouTuber, I do credit the YouTuber. I got this from so-and-so. Just, not that I need to, but I want to. Even though I know it when I look at it, I still feel better. It even makes me happy to have, for instance, I have one from Donna from Embracing the Moon that I liked that she had up on her channel. I got several from Kellyanne Maddox, and I just like having their names in my book. I've got recipes in my book that I got from Lady Gravedancer, and I credit her. Just, again, it's nice just to even have her name in my book, but that's my own personal choice and preference. So as I said, I'm going to go ahead and print these real quick, and I'll show you how I get them in the book. So here's my first page, and you can see the margin is on the right. Now, in order to get this to print properly, okay, so you saw mine comes out upside down. So I need to make sure that this part is fed down into the machine. The top part of the first page is down when I print my next page. Okay, so now you see I have my front and my back. Okay, I'm trying to get you in here as good as I can. Again, forgive the angle. All right. So again, this is just for my personal grimoire, the way that it's set up and needs to be done. Ignore the mess on my desk. I've been working doing stuff for creations. It's just easy for me to use what I've already done as a guide, and so I just make a little mark. And then I also like to outline where my holes need to go on the page, and I outline the whole thing so that because if I just make a dot, I might line the hole up wrong. I grabbed my handy dandy Cricut cutter. It is a lifesaver. I talked about it on my not so witchy favorites. I use it for so many things. I just have to line up my little tick mark with the guide and the cutter and cut it. And then, of course, I grab my hole punch and I line up the holes as perfectly as possible. And now it's ready to go in my book. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful in some way. So I have gotten my next pages in, my tarot. So I had shown, you know, the gods and goddesses, and now I've got my tarot in, except for this very last sheet because it's blank on the back and I already know what's going on there. It'll just be easier for me to print that if I don't trim it and punch holes in it and everything just yet. I will say this, the most difficult, labor-intensive part of this whole thing is the actual layout. It is typing out the information, finding the images, mapping out the pages. That is what takes the most effort and takes the longest. It is absolutely a labor of love. For me, it is totally worth it. But for example, you know, in my tarot, each and every tarot card is different. And that's 7 pages. I have 14 different spreads in here at the moment. So 14 different sets of individual tarot cards that I went in Google Images and found pictures that I liked and mapped them out, laid them out on the page. It was very time consuming. The tarot section actually took me longer than anything else thus far. But it's very satisfying for me because this is how I want it to look. And so I'll take that time, I'll put in that effort and that work. Yeah, anyway, that's my process for creating my grimoire. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and until next time, much love and gratitude.